إن الحمد لله ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ونصلي ونسلم عليه وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه بجهدهم وتضحيتهم قام هذا الدين فرضي الله عنهم أجمعين. Sorry, I got distracted by the noise outside. In this khutbah, we wanted to focus on looking at Surah Al-Takafur. But before going into that, I wanted to share with you, there is a website, it's called Arabic Fluency. Arabic Fluency. And the Sheikh who's the one that's responsible for that website is doing something that is very, very, very important. It's very beneficial, especially to many of you young brothers and the students of the Arabic language. It is related to what we're going to say right now. What he is doing is that he's introducing Arabic poetry, both that which came before Islam and that which was developed as people became Muslim in the time period of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's important because when you begin to understand the Arabic language and you begin to understand the poetry of the past, you're not going to see that it's too much different than what you see in rap music. How they're challenging each other, they're insulting each other, they're talking about how many women they have, how much riches that they have, and so on and so forth. And when you begin to look at that, sometimes they are very creative in how it is that they're speaking. The Arabs at that time period, it's said that they had developed their language to a high degree. To the point that there's even a story that the poet Jarir, that one time he was insulted by a particular tribe. And not only insulted by a particular tribe, they actually had one of the tribe leaders, Numair. His son had actually caused harm to Jarir. He hit the beast that he was on, and Jarir ended up falling and getting hurt. So Jarir went back to his home and he told the person that was his companion, his assistant or whatever, make sure that the lamp stays on all night. So Jarir, throughout the whole of the night, he compiled some lines of poetry that were so strong that by the next day, they began to be spread out. And when they were spread out, Numair and his tribe, they were insulted to such an extent that they didn't want to even associate with Numair anymore. The power of the word. When you understand Arabic poetry, at least at the basic level, there's some benefit in it. You begin to see how people use language and so on and so forth. Then you can distinguish the difference between poetry and the Quran. Last week in Hispanic Muslim Day, we had two of the top nasheed artists here in the masjid. Unfortunately, many of y'all didn't come. We had a big party here. We blasted. We had a brother, he actually is recorded for your benefit. He was talking about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in poetic form and talking about the Quran, and we enjoyed ourselves. And to be honest with you, it's better than 99% of the music that's coming out. And unfortunately, many of you lost the opportunity. I actually had reached about $500. We could have given it out as a prize. And I had challenged you. And I said, somebody come and create some poetry or even a TikTok video that will support the deen. You lost the opportunity. We can come back at it again if you want it to be the case, but you have to show me some sincerity. And so to careful, what we begin to find is that the Quran is addressing the mentality that is there in the Arabian Peninsula, so that you can understand what's happening. When the Quran is saying al-hakum at-takathur, it's talking about those who have been caught up. They're diverted in just accumulating in the dunya. At first value, people will say, well, is the Quran saying that we shouldn't pursue wealth? The Quran is not saying we shouldn't pursue wealth. The dunya is not going to move. Your life is not going to move without wealth. We're not going to be able to give sadaqah. We're not going to be able to pay zakat. We're not going to be able to live without wealth. And wealth, people, is not just money. It's not just money. And we learned that in this area that we're living in right now. Wealth is land. Wealth is resources. Wealth is not just paper money. Right now, real estate is, if you own real estate in this area, is more than what most people have in the bank. It's not money, but it has value that can come in money. So at that time, the people were so caught up in that the Quran is coming to wake them up. And it's saying, this back and forth that you're in your life and you're just pursuing. Maybe some of you have the understanding that every week or every other week or every 2 weeks or every month, you're looking for the latest video game. Doesn't matter if it's $150, $200, if it's used $75. You're looking who has the most collection. In the past, people were vying with the Pokemon. Who has the most Pokemon? That's years ago. And some men, what they do is they're accumulating cars. Some women, they're accumulating shoes. They have a closet that's enough to put shoes for the whole of a village. And some people, they're in the movement of accumulating paper wealth. Here the Quran is saying that type of distraction, that it distracts you from realizing you and your reality in this dunya. And ultimately, that you have to face Allah Ta'ala, then the reality will come. حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرِ. When you go into the grave, that reality which you were running away from in the dunya, all of us will have to face it. That's the question. Whether young or old, whether the khutbah is entertaining or not entertaining, whether you want to be here or not be here, whether you want to get it over or not get it over, everyone is going to have to go into the grave and take account for what he or she did with their lives in this dunya. There's a lot to be said about the surah, and unfortunately our time is limited. But Imam al-Suyuti rahmatullahi alayhi, he said that this surah, this chapter of the Quran at the Takathur, is an explanation for the ayat in Surah Al-Qariyah which comes before it. فَأُمُّهُ حَاوِيَةٌ. So here, the Quran is saying that the place of residence where the person is going to live, that their scales of good deeds are short, is the hellfire. So the Quran is constantly telling us, reflect on your deeds. You're responsible for your actions. That's the message that I want to get to you. If you haven't gotten to the point of certainty in believing in Allah, then you have to come to the point of knowing that your actions, you're accountable for that. And then the Quran is adding on and saying that there's scales. Those scales on the day of judgment are going to be of two types. Hopefully we end on this part. or we're grouped with those people in which their skills, فَأَمَّا مَنْ ثَقُلَتْ مَوَازِينُهُ فَهُوَ فِي عِيشَةٍ رَاضِيَةٍ. The person whose scales are heavy, that person is going to live a life that they're pleased with. Now we can test that all we want. The Quran is saying, be my guest and test it. Now this is a warning and a challenge. The Quran is saying what's before you in your life right now is that you have time on your hands. And what you do with that time is either going to protect you when you go into the grave, or it's going to work against you. And test the law to see. Because when you go into the grave, this life will be finished, and that reality that we have to confront is either going to be that we're on the side with Allah, or we're on the side against ourselves. That's heavy. Who wants to test that? So the wise path is to be responsible for our actions. The wise path that we have to convince ourselves is that every action that we do and every intention that we have is being written. And I mentioned this on numerous occasions and in different situations and so on and so forth. So that we come back, and I say to myself first, so that we come back to properly understand. And I always use this example. For instance, this camera that's right here, or the camera that's in the back, or the cameras that are in the streets, or the camera and the microphones that are on our phones. Many of us know there's constant recording. But what many of us don't move to is the recording of Allah wa ta'ala. That the angels are recording our deeds, so that it puts us in a state of mind so that we know that Allah is constantly watching us and that we are held accountable. We fear more the human being that is watching than we fear Allah wa ta'ala. But at the end of the day, Allah wa ta'ala is not coming with that type of approach of force and so on and so forth. Allah wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And Allah repeats that on a regular basis in the Quran. The other position, فَأَمَّا مَنْ خَفَّتْ مَوَازِينُهُ فَأُمُّهُ هَاوِيَةٌ. The person whose scales are light, and this is right, everything is not always bushra. Everything is not always happy news and fun and so on and so forth. Here now there's consequences. فَأُمُّهُ هَاوِيَةٌ. Here the Quran is putting forward first the abode, where you're going to be. Then it describes it. Is the abyss, is the pit of fire. And there, if you go into that reality, then you'll be sure about what it is that Allah wa ta'ala said. There won't be any doubt, there won't be any questioning, there won't be any distraction, there won't be any excuses. After we leave in this world and we go into that grave, then what we do in the dunya will be very apparent to us. And the reality is this, that any of us can leave right now. Death can overtake any of us at the moment, at the instant. How many videos do we see of people giving khutbah on the minbar and they die on the spot, or they're in Hajj? Worse than that is how many people in the dunya, they die and their state with Allah wa ta'ala is not correct. They die as they're sinning. And when they leave this dunya, the only thing that they have as the last deed and the last word between themselves and Allah is that they went against Allah. When Allah wa ta'ala, all of their life, sent the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, rahmatan lil alameen, to say, I love you. And we reject. That's why we say we have to be firm in our identity as Muslims. We can't get lost as Muslims. Because one of the tricks of shaitan is to make the fun and to make the entertainment seem so beautiful to us, but in reality is the gateway to Jahannam and to our own destruction. And we mentioned that in one of the ways, يعني من طرق الشيطان كيف يزين للناس الحرام. يعني we mentioned it. From the way that shaitan makes haram look beautiful is through the music. I never said that music is haram. But we know the impact that bad music is having on our youth. And the reason why I target the music, not because music in itself is a problem, but because it has everything. Where people, they're calling themselves God. Where people are promoting robbery. Where people are promoting to go against the rules. We have marriage in Islam. And then you have whole songs celebrating everything against marriage. You have killing that's forbidden in Islam. And you have young Muslim youth on the microphones talking about killing each other and shedding each other's blood. We mentioned that. That's not something that is just made up. That's a challenge that we have right now. And so we have to have that reality in our minds. What are we doing with our lives? What are we doing with our time? And everything around us, whether you are on your cell phone and your cell phone talks about your usage, you're on this page this amount of time, you're on YouTube this amount of time, you're on Facebook this amount of time. Even your alarm, you get up at this time, you get the GPS, you're going in this direction, this amount of, everything is calculating time for us, but nahnu fil ghafila. But we're forgetful. We forget the real timekeeper is the angel that is writing everything that we do. We're writing the stories of our lives. And the stories of our lives will tell us where it is that we're going to be as far as closeness to Allah or distance from Allah. So between Surah Al-Qadiyah and Surah Al-Takathur, we learn about the mizan, that there's that scale. And so we're in this dunya and we have to ask ourselves, what am I doing for my scales? It's not a joke. The Quran is emphasizing the importance of doing good, that it has value, that we're going to be accountable for it. And that there's a day of judgment. That's the belief when we say ilm al-ghayb or belief in the unseen. We start talking about what happens when we leave this world to go into the grave. That's all from the unseen. The Quran is giving us a heads up. This is the GPS. This is the path. If you go this route and you detour, then you're going to be in problems. This is the safest route to go. And that is the route of Al-Islam. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا هِيَ نَارٌ حَامِيَةٌ. So what's going to make you realize what this reality is for those people whose scale is light? Is a blazing fire. And that's where we have to take account of ourselves. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to forgive us our sins and to make it easy for us. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. This is a separate khutbah from the first khutbah. Everyone knows right now that in the Caribbean they got hit with a hurricane. And particularly, I'm from Puerto Rico. And ever since 2017, I've watched the progression of the situation in Puerto Rico become worse and worse. with regard to the climate. And so right now, what we're facing is a people without water, a people without electricity in that similar situation in the Dominican Republic. And so we've taken it as a responsibility upon ourselves, NHIEC, Mass New York, 3 Puerto Rican imams, to go and help. And I'll be going to help in next week sometime. We've been doing this for the past 6 years or so. And I myself have a whole complete different understanding of da'wah than many people in this regard. I personally believe that when we help the people, is an act of da'wah, the people see Islam. But we're not saying that we're helping the people for them to come into Islam. We're saying that we help the people for them to see Islam. On top of that, aside from it being a commitment back to the Latino community, we have a weak Muslim community in the Caribbean. In 1948, when the situation in Palestine occurred and the Palestinians began to leave, they resettled many of them all over Latin America, and that was the beginning of the Muslim community from the Arab side. There's another history, I'm not going to get into that with regard to the Muslims in the Caribbean. But ever since 1948, the Muslim community has been there. And at one point in time, they were celebrating Christmas and they were eating pork and they weren't even making salah. That's the importance of da'wah to ourselves. And so we try to go and we support, and they're doing a good job of trying to maintain their children, but they can't do it alone. They need our support. So this is the situation. We're in between two fronts. We're in between trying to help the Muslim community itself and humanity. So after the Jummah, I asked, I'm not going to do a fundraiser and ask you give $1,000, this and that. That's between you and Allah at the end of the day. I have confidence though that the people will come and support. So I ask you to go down to the office and contribute so that we can do our work. And like I said, I don't believe مجرد الكلام في قضية الدعوة. We have to combine what it is that we say and what it is that we do. And that's the most difficult thing, al-iman qawl wa amal. And I'm not saying that min bab jama' tabarruat. I'm not saying that iman is that we confess that we're Muslim and that we do deeds to encourage you to give. No. You should know what to give. I'm saying that so that we become better Muslims. So that we learn how to remove al-nifaq al-amali. You know what al-nifaq al-amali is? Al-nifaq al-amali is when we are not doing what we say that we believe in. Hypocrisy that is not at the level of kufr. But kufr is when we pretend to the people we believe something in our hearts, we don't believe it. Al-nifaq al-kufri. So it's going to take us some time to learn how to combine between action and speech. Because the whole of our cultures and our environment has taught us not to combine between the two. And this is the importance of identity. Especially when you begin to hide your identity more and more and more. Speaking to the young brothers. The older brothers, they paved the way in the fight for us to establish Islam. And we're not talking about a fight in a negative way. You know, we're talking about the struggle to implement the deen in our lives, in our character, in our communities. The more you hide and you go from Muhammad to Mo, the easier it becomes to remove yourself from what? From the practice of the deen. And I'll say this, I'll take a couple more minutes in this regard. When we talk about the issue of preparing for our lives, when we talk about what? The issue of preparing for our lives. All of us are responsible for these young men. I can bring you studies as to the situation and the crisis of boys all across the country. and why it is that boys lack motivation, and why it is that boys are on video games, and why it is that when it comes time to get married, boys are not responsible. All of us are responsible in how we use our time, and when we're thinking about right now what we're doing, what's going to go on our scales. Everybody who thinks that they have ideas, all the fathers, all the uncles, or everybody, the professional, the one that demands to be called doctor, and the other one that demands to be called muhandis. We have a crisis. And the crisis is that we're not using our time and our resources properly in order to build our young men. So what's happening is that our young men, they retreat from their identity as Muslims, and the ones that take the way are our young women, because they have the hijab, and we force the hijab, and we force them, don't do this, don't do that. So it's not just the issue of talking about the scales on the individual level. It's the scales on a collective level. يعني الفرض الكفايات في بعض الأحيان يعني أهم من الفرض العين. Collective responsibility sometimes is more important than individual responsibility. And so our collective scale of these that will be accountable is how we let our young men destroy themselves. And we did nothing about it as a community except talk about it at the individual level. That means everybody has to prepare our young men. So I have something to negotiate with when they come to the young sisters and they want to get married. So that we bring the young sisters men that are ready to get married. That's what I want to be the theme throughout the whole of the year, this whole school year. How are we preparing our young men so that they use their time properly? That's the responsibility of the whole of the community. It's not just the fathers. It's not just the mothers. It's not just one family. It's the responsibility especially of the men of the community. And people get mad at me. And I'm going to cut the khutbah. And they say, why do you do that? Why do you talk like that? Because we're talking about يعني نحن نتكلم في فقه الأولويات وفهم الواقع على الوجه الصحيح. We're talking about the priorities, understanding them, and understanding our reality as it is. So then the question becomes, what are we doing? See what I'm saying? What are we doing to address it? It can't just be theory. It can't just be a khutbah that is politically correct. It can't just be a khutbah that's just encouraging. Anybody that knows their priorities and they see a threat or they see an emergency, they move to address the emergency. They just don't turn away and let the house burn down. So the question is the mizan. What is our collective mizan? And what is it that we're putting on that scale so that it weighs heavy? We ask Allah Ta'ala to guide us and to aid us and to forgive us. We ask Allah Ta'ala for our sister Maryam Ramadan. She passed away, and we ask Allah Ta'ala to raise her station and to give her the highest levels of Jannah and to turn her bad deeds into good deeds. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to descend peace and tranquility upon her family. And we ask Allah Ta'ala that her family mention her in dua from here to Yawm al-Qiyamah, and they establish sadaqah jariyah for her. And we ask that for all of the Muslims. And we beg Allah Ta'ala for mercy and forgiveness. Aqimus salat.